Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sunny, and I'm in the paradise of Maldives at the moment. In fact, I've been here for the last 20 years. Currently, I'm working as a director F&B in St. Regis Maldives. But prior to that, I've been to Chief Sommelier, and I trained sommelier as well before I became a director. I'm going to share with you my golden nuggets in 3 parts. So let's start with part 1 today. And the first question that something that which is happened to me many years ago, when I was visited by a friend, brought over a bottle of champagne. Actually, it was a champagne, and I asked him why didn't he cork his champagne or put a stopper on the champagne. He said, "Oh, I opened 2 nights ago, and my mother always put a silver spoon over it, and it will keep the bubbles going." But did you know that a silver spoon on the champagne or into the champagne bottle or sparkling wine, in that matter of fact, does not stop the bubbly going away? Bubble is come from carbon dioxide of our sparkling wines, and that will escape the moment you open it. Yes, I have to say that bottle of champagne that I drank that day still have frizzante, which is slightly sparkling, but that is not because of the silver spoon at all. In fact, the silver spoon does nothing to stop the bubbles. Oh well, the most asked question in the restaurant sometimes, "Oh, this is a vintage wine, so this is very good." But in fact, almost all wines have a vintage, because vintage is not indication of a great wine. Vintage is indication that the year the grape was harvested. So therefore, it has no indication that that wine is actually good or bad. You really need to know a bit of the knowledge, and you need to know whether this particular vintage was a great vintage or it was an ordinary vintage. And when I was in my younger days, in the school times, I always wondering, wow, these people can drink such an expensive wine. It must taste very good. But you know that it doesn't have to be very expensive to be a great wine. In fact, the more expensive it is, it doesn't mean that it tastes. It really is your personal taste, what you liked and what you desire. And just because there's a price tag, because there's a demand, it doesn't mean that it suits your taste. The most important advice I have for you is that choose wine that you enjoy the most within your budget. And every single dollar's price tags have their own great wines to enjoy. And very often we have guests who always say that, this is a blended wine, so it cannot be good. And only the 100% from one variety, then it is a good wine. In fact, this is a myth. Most of the French wines that you know, especially those ones from Bordeaux, are predominantly blended wines. All the great names, Chateau Latour, Lafite, Margaux, Bouton Rothschild, they are all blended with Cabernet Merlot blend together, and some other variety as well. And so it is not true that a blended wine is not a great wine. Even in the country like Australia and in America, did you know that on the label, when it said that Merlot, it doesn't have to be 100% Merlot. It can be up to 85% of Merlot and then another blend of 15 to 25% of other grape variety. So therefore, it is not true that blended wines are not a great wine. And when you arrive in the restaurant, when you order a glass of wine even, or a bottle of wine, you very often receive a small tiny portion to taste. Did you know what it is for? In fact, this is for you to taste whether the wine was oxidized or been tainted by cocaine, which is a moldy and like a wet cardboard smell on the wine. The sommelier actually wasn't asking you whether you like the wine or you enjoying the wine or not. So do remember that if you order the wine by the bottle and the sommelier open for you, and there's no fault of the wine, even you don't like it, and it really depends on whether the sommelier will let you choose another wine. When I was a sommelier, I always come across the guests very, very afraid to use or call a sommelier to help them, because they have this perception that a sommelier is there to rip them off, to upsell them expensive wine. But really, a reputable restaurant or a reputable sommelier would never do that. They will select the best wine with the price range that you have indicated you can afford to spend. And nothing more enjoyable for me to select an inexpensive wine for a guest, and then they discover something new. That is what a sommelier for. And as a sommelier, we like to guide you through our wine list. Sometimes can be like a huge, massive wine list. And we want to guide you through to maybe try something that you have never ever tried before, or you would never even think about buying them if you wouldn't meet someone who talk about it. And that is what the sommelier for. We want you to discover, and we want to help you to enjoy a creative experience, a moment that you can never forget, even though that wine could be inexpensive. And in the restaurant, we very often always hear the guests say that, I want, this 2005 was a great vintage. I want to have a vintage of 2005. And even from a lesser producer, they think that 2005, because it's a great vintage, they will think that it will be a great wine. In fact, do you know that? Did you know the best way to enjoy a great wine from a great producer is choose one of their lesser vintage, but from a great producer. Vintage, you can have a great vintage. If you don't have a great producer, you can never make a great wine. And I would rather choose a vintage which is more easier to drink now and more accessible, but from a great producer. Buying wine, most important thing, you need to know the producer, and not just about the vintage, but the producer. But I tell you what, even sommelier, we got hung up with this. 2010, 2009 was a fantastic vintage. I only want to buy that and list it on the wine list. But they've forgotten some wine like 2008 and overshadowed by 2009 and 2010 can be as good from a great producer. And so I urge you to try the producer. Look for the great producer, not just about the vintage. To decanting or not decanting a wine is really have a lot of people who pro and people who are actually say that you don't have to. I'm in that camp there, which is I don't think so. You need to decanting all wines. Wines only to be decanted when it's really old age, when you have a lot of sediment in the bottom. Then you will ask the sommelier, please decant it for me. In any other young vintage wine, young wines, you don't need to decant it. You just need to pour into your glass and let it breathe a couple of minutes, and you can enjoy it beautifully and perfectly without having to have a decanting. I like to keep things very, very short and sweet. That is why the part one is very sweet and short. And so I hope all of you to stay home, stay safe, and stay healthy. And we shall see you in part two.